Last video, we introduced Telemachus, as well as the idea that sonhood, like manhood, is both something given, that is something received, as well as something that must be earned. We also learned that Odysseus was a man of sense and of courage, of word and of deed. Now, if Telemachus is going to recognize himself as his father's son, he too must become a man of both word and deed, a man of sense and of courage. In order to do so, though, he has to come to know his father. In the previous books, Telemachus started to know something of his father through Athena, the goddess who loves Odysseus, the goddess who loves his father. Now remember, though, that in the Trojan War, Athena openly fought on the side of Odysseus and revealed herself to him always. That is not how Athena comes to Telemachus. Rather, she comes to Telemachus in disguise. She is the hidden goddess. As we'll see throughout the next several videos, that point is important both to the nature of the gods, the nature of men, and also the nature of fatherhood. So in Book 3, Telemachus is on his journey to find news of his father, and he joins Athena, which is a demonstration of that principle of dual causality. And they join together in this common work to come to find news of Odysseus. They arrive on the island of Pylos, King Nestor's island, and Nestor is a friend of Telemachus's father in the Iliad. He's extremely old. He's ruled over 3 generations of men, and he's known for both his bravery and his counsel. So he's a man of courage and he's a man of sense, like Odysseus himself. And he advised both Agamemnon and Achilles during the war. And Agamemnon and Achilles are at odds for most of the Iliad. Now, like a lot of old people, he is also known for his very long stories. Now, remember, Telemachus is young and he's inexperienced. And so meeting a brave warrior and a wise king would be pretty intimidating, especially one who is good friends with a father who you don't know but have high hopes in. So when Telemachus and mentor Athena land on the island, Athena needs to encourage Telemachus. Look to the bottom of page 107. And as we read these passages, keep that principle of dual causality, that idea of common work, very close in mind. So look at the very bottom of page 107. Telemachus climbed out last, with Athena far in front, and the bright-eyed goddess urged the prince along. Telemachus, no more shyness, this is not the time. We sailed the seas for this, for news of your father. Where does he lie buried? What fate did he meet? So go right up to Nestor, breaker of horses. We'll make him yield the secrets of his heart. Press him yourself to tell the whole truth. He'll never lie. The man is far too wise. Notice how Telemachus responds. The prince replied, wise in his own way too. How can I greet him, mentor, even approach the king? I'm hardly adept at subtle conversation. Someone my age might feel shy. What's more, interrogating an older man. Remember, Athena is going to help Telemachus through both direct inspiration and counsel, so telling him what to do, giving him ideas directly into his mind. We'll see this also in our next video, that she does this for Odysseus too. But not only inspiration, she also provides him the opportunities to learn through his own experience. So it's not only inspiration, but it's a sort of experiential prudence that he's developing through his journey. Both of these, inspiration and experience, are going to help Telemachus to become a man of sense, that is, of words, of principles, and also of deeds, of action, both of which are necessary if he's going to become prudent like his father. Now, note that when they are met on the shores of Pylos, Nestor and his family do not know who these strangers are. Telemachus and Mentor just show up on the shores, and they do not know who they are. But they're welcomed. Telemachus and Mentor are both welcomed by Nestor and his family, and they're invited to celebrate and to pour libations and to pray to the gods. Because as we read on line 55, all men need the gods. Next video, we're going to talk a lot more about the relationship between men and gods, and especially what men owe to the gods. Okay, so Athena prays first. Athena prays first. And I want you to notice something important on line 70. This is page 108. Look at line, or 109, excuse me. So she prayed and brought it all to pass. Okay, so Athena prays, but then she has the power to bring her prayer to pass. Well, then Telemachus shares in Athena's words. She offered the rich two-handled cup to Telemachus, Odysseus' son, who echoed back her prayer word for word. So Telemachus is able to share in the prayer of the goddess who brings all these things to pass. They are sharing in that common work. Athena is bringing Telemachus up with her and allowing him to have something of a participation in her mission. Now, after the prayers, Telemachus now has the courage to speak and to inquire after his father. So look to line 83. Now he's poised, Telemachus. He's no longer the shy Telemachus. So poised Telemachus answered, filled with heart, this like passion and courage. The heart Athena herself inspired. The heart Athena herself inspired to ask for the news about his father gone so long and to make his name throughout the mortal world. Note that Telemachus is going to make his name. Now, this the Greek word for name means fame, but it's also a sharing in his father's fame, in his father's name. So we know that the name Telemachus is going to earn by the end of the poem is the blessed son of God like Odysseus. Telemachus becomes the blessed son of God like Odysseus. And in doing so, he shares in his father's fame. But it's not just, oh, you're really well known. There's something very rich about this name that he's going to earn. Now, remember, ostensibly, this odyssey that Telemachus is on is to find information about his dad. Now, Nestor does not know whether Odysseus is dead or alive, and so he can't really give any news of Odysseus, but he can teach Telemachus something about Odysseus. Telemachus learns, if you look at line 131, that Odysseus is cunning. He's cunning. He's a master of strategies. Note what he says just below that line. Like Athena, Nestor says if when he's talking to Telemachus. If you are in fact his son. If you are in fact his son. But then he adds, actually, let's look to that together. So this is line 131, page 111. He says, your father, look just above that. And no one there could hope to rival Odysseus, not for sheer cunning. At every twist of strategy he excelled us all. Your father, yes, if you are in fact his son. I look at you and a sense of wonder takes me. Okay, so just like when Mentes greets Telemachus in the early books, Nestor says if. He's kind of simultaneously inspiring confidence in Telemachus' idea that Odysseus is his father, but it's that thing where sonhood has to be earned, right? You're going to prove to us. I'm not simply going to convince you that you are Odysseus' son. You're going to prove to us by having Odysseus' characteristics that you are his son. He adds words. Look back there. He says, your way with words, it's just like his. I'd swear no youngster could ever speak like you, so apt, so telling. Again, remember that to be a son is something given. He receives his father Odysseus, but it's also something earned. To be a man is something earned, and he's on his way. He now has a way with words that he did not have 10 pages ago. Now, finally, in telling of his own story from Troy, Nestor recounts the tragedy of Agamemnon again. The tragedy of Agamemnon and how young Orestes avenged his father's death. Look to page 113, line 222. He says, "And you, my brave friend, how tall and handsome I see you now. Be brave, you too, so men will come to sing your praises down the years." You look just above at line 220, he said, "Ah, how fine it is when a man is brought down to leave a son behind." To leave a son behind. So there's been a real change in Telemachus, not only in his words, but also in his courage and his sense of responsibility as well. So look to page 114, line 234. Remember back to book 1 when Telemachus was lamenting the situation with the suitors at his house, and he's just daydreaming that his father will drop from the sky and solve all of his problems, right? That was his wish. That was his dream. Okay, again, we're looking at page 114, 232. And he's reflecting on Orestes and his fame across the world. He says, "If only the gods would arm me in such power, I'd take revenge on the lawless, brazen suitors." If only the gods would arm me in such power. He's not just wanting Odysseus to come and be the daddy who solves all of his problems. No, he is ready to be a man and to be courageous and to take this responsibility on for himself, fend off the suitors and defend his own house. Okay. Remember the characteristics of Odysseus, of the man. He loves his home and he's responsible for it. He is prudent, that is, he's a man of both words, of sense, as well as a man of action and courage. And both of these things together make up practical wisdom. So knowing what to do in your given circumstances and having the courage to actually do it, that's what prudence is. And then the third is that he's pious. He sacrifices to the gods who are greater than any man. Again, just a reminder, prudence is practical wisdom. So it's knowing what is good, but also how to act well in your particular moment. Now, Telemachus is making real progress toward fulfillment of the first two characteristics, that is, love and responsibility for home and being prudent. And Athena, the god in disguise, has given him more confidence in the divine, but Telemachus nevertheless still lacks piety. He still lacks this sort of disposition of honor and trust toward the gods who are higher than him, who are greater than him. Now, Nestor knows that Telemachus' home is being ravaged by the lawless and the brazen suitors, and Nestor wishes that Athena might come and fight beside Telemachus as she fought beside his father Odysseus. If you look to line 245, also on page 114, Nestor says, "Tell me though, do you let yourself be so abused, or do people round about, stirred up by the prompting of some god, despise you now? Who knows if he will return someday to take revenge on all of their violence? Single-handed perhaps, or with an Argive army at his back. If only the bright-eyed goddess chose to love you, just as she lavished care on brave Odysseus years ago in the land of Troy where we Achaeans struggle. If only Athena would love you like she loves your father. I've never seen the immortal show so much affection as Pallas openly showed him, standing by your father. If only she'd favor you, tend you with all her heart, many a suitor would then lose all thought of marriage, blotted out forever." Okay, so Nestor thinks this is actually a possibility. Athena loves Odysseus and fought openly beside him in the Trojan War, which we're going to talk a lot about in the next video. If only she would do that for you too, Telemachus. Now look at the sort of lack of confidence that Telemachus shows in Athena that we see just underneath those lines. He says, "Never, your majesty. That will never come to pass, I know. What you say dumbfounds me, staggers imagination. It's beyond hope, it's even beyond imagination. Hope, hope as I will, that day will never dawn, not even if the gods should will it so." He doesn't think that Athena has the power, has the capability to come in and fight with him and defeat the suitors and win back his house. Okay, well, what's remarkable is that Athena is standing right next to him in the guise of Mentor. And look at her rebuke. She says, "Telemachus." Pallas Athena broke in sharply, her eyes afire. "What's this nonsense slipping through your teeth? It's light work for a willing god to save a mortal even half the world away. This is easy work for a god. No matter how far you are, if we are willing, if a god is willing, we can save you easily." He needs to have confidence in the strength of the gods. Okay, the last real thing that Telemachus learns from Nestor, again drawing upon the tragic fate of Agamemnon, is not to be away from your home for too long. If you look at page 117, line 345, he says, "Don't be away from home for too long, for a man must protect his holdings, his power, his wealth, not to mention his mother." Okay, so go ahead and visit Menelaus in Sparta, but don't stay too long. Be ready to go back and take responsibility. So after pouring libations and making sacrifices, Athena changes form and she flies away as an eagle. So she was in Mentor's form, then she changes and flies away as an eagle. And although she's still in disguise, this reveals once more her divinity. Everybody knows now that she's a goddess. And Nestor knows with confidence that she must be that very same goddess who so openly and devoutly loved Odysseus, Telemachus' father, during the Trojan War. Loved by Athena, Nestor is sure that Telemachus will earn his name, that he will become the son of godlike Odysseus. Look again to page 119, or I guess flipping a couple pages. So 119, line 420. "The old king, astonished by what he'd seen, grasped Telemachus' hand and cried out to the prince, 'Dear boy, never fear you'll be a coward or defenseless, not if at your young age the gods will guard you so. You will not be a coward, you will not be defenseless, if the gods do love you so.'" Okay, well that's it for book 3. Now we're going to move on to book 4. So in book 4, Telemachus is still on his journey to find news of his father, and he's now on his way to Sparta to ask after Menelaus. Now Menelaus is the husband of Helen. Remember, Helen of Troy, the most beautiful woman in the world, whose adultery with Paris was the cause of the Trojan War. Menelaus is also the brother of the murdered Agamemnon and the uncle of the famous Orestes. So Menelaus is an important character not only in the Iliad for his own right, but also for all of his relations as well. Now, Telemachus is no longer joined by Athena, even in disguise. Instead, Nestor's youngest son accompanies Telemachus to Sparta. So Pisistratus is his name. Now, Telemachus and Pisistratus, they're foils for one another. We're meant to compare the two of them. And Pisistratus is supposed to help us to understand something more about Telemachus. They're both the same age, but they're at different levels of maturity. So Telemachus grew up without a father. He's unsure of himself. He's inexperienced. He's never even traveled away from home before. Pisistratus is the exact opposite. So he also is about 20 years old. He grew up with his father. He's a confident speaker. He's the leader of armies. He's experienced. Okay, so when the two land on the island of Sparta, Menelaus and Helen are celebrating two wedding feasts, their son's wedding and their daughter's wedding. But they give us a lovely example of xenia, that Greek virtue of hospitality, on pages 125 and 126. Now, we're going to talk a lot more about xenia in future videos, the next 2 videos from now. Nevertheless, if you look at this example, that is another example of xenia. But for now, we're going to focus on what Telemachus learns about his father. Unsurprisingly, Menelaus tells us again about the story of his brother Agamemnon, how he was betrayed by his wife and murdered by her lover, and how he was avenged by Orestes. But he also gives us indication that these sorts of things are supposed to be learned by your father. On page 127, line 105, he says, "You must have heard my story from your fathers." This is just assumed that fathers tell these stories and teach these lessons. This is why Telemachus needs to go on the journey, because he needs to learn from others what he did not know, what he did not come to know through his own father. Now, of all those that he fought with, no one grieves Menelaus like Odysseus. For he says no one worked as hard, achieved more than Odysseus, and only Odysseus is lost, either dead or alive, nobody knows. Hearing his father's name spoken by Menelaus, Telemachus cries, and it would be worth your considering whether those tears are different from his tears in books 1 and 2, and why? Anyway, both Menelaus and Helen eventually recognize who Telemachus is due to his resemblance with Odysseus. Both Helen and Menelaus tell stories also that help Telemachus learn about his father and also prepare him to recognize Odysseus later in the story, even when he comes in disguise. But before we get to that, I want to note something again about the epic. Remember that one of the characteristics of an epic is that it restores this equilibrium between the male and the female, between men and women. This is mostly going to happen through good marriages. But Menelaus and Helen give us a really good example of a very bad marriage. So it's not one, theirs is not one of complementarity, of love, of respect, of equilibrium. On page 131, Helen mixes a drug potion to dull the passions. She wants to dull anger and sadness, so she mixes drugs so that you don't feel that she and Menelaus and Telemachus, they wouldn't feel the anger or the sadness that they do so naturally. But even so, even with this drug potion, when they're telling their stories about Odysseus, anger and sadness emerge. Okay, so first, Telemachus learns through Helen to recognize Odysseus in disguise. And she recounts how Odysseus snuck into Troy. Remember, he's very cunning. He snuck into Troy disguised as a beggar. And Helen explains how happy she was when she discovered that this was Odysseus within the walls, because she says, at this point, my heart had changed. She said, at this point, I regretted forsaking my husband, my child, our marriage bed. But note what Menelaus does, how he responds to this. Well, right after Helen's story that puts herself in a pretty good light, that she, desired the good of Odysseus and wanted Odysseus to help take down the Trojans, Menelaus tells the story of the Trojan horse. This is actually a story that we don't get in the Iliad, but we do get in the Odyssey. The conclusion of the Trojan horse, Odysseus has this idea, the conclusion of the Trojan War is to give this gift horse, this Trojan horse, so all the Trojans think that the Greeks are leaving, and they leave behind a gift that, is like an apology gift and an offering to the god. And the Trojans bring that horse inside their walls. Well, all of the Greek heroes are hiding in the horse. So once the Trojans let their guard down, the Greeks are able to jump out of the horse and sack the city, take down the Trojans. Well, when all the Greeks are hiding in the horse, which, mind you, is the very end of the war, Helen circles the horse. She's going around and around, and she's calling each Greek warrior by name, trying to call him out. Odysseus, come. Nestor, come. Agamemnon, come. Not only is she calling their names, she's calling their names in the voice of their wives, right? These wives who they've been missing for 10 years, taunting them, tempting them to come out and expose themselves and ruin their plan. Now, Odysseus is the hero here, and the story told by Menelaus reveals another really important characteristic of Odysseus, and it's his restraint. So Odysseus is not only able to hold himself back when, in the voice of Penelope, Helen is calling out his name, right? This woman whom he longs to see, longs to be with his loving wife. Odysseus is not only to restrain himself from acting upon the impulse to go find his wife and reveal himself and ruin their plan, but he's also able to restrain all the other men as well. Acknowledging this tension, right? So this is what Menelaus does. He's like, oh, that's so nice, my wife. You were so loyal and you wanted to come home. But remember this other story where you were actually our enemy and tried to get us all killed? Okay, so Telemachus has matured, right? He's becoming a man. And so acknowledging this kind of social tension, you have a husband calling out his wife for betrayal right in front of him and right in front of their guests. Telemachus picks up on this social awkwardness, this tension, and he changes the subject. And the poet in that moment calls him clear-sighted Telemachus. He could see what was going on clearly, and he was able prudently to navigate the situation. Now, a lot more happens in this book. Menelaus tells of the old man of the sea, and most importantly, through that story, he shares that Odysseus is still alive. So Telemachus actually has some really important information. He's alive and he's on Calypso's island, and we'll talk about Calypso a lot in our next video. But I want us to end where we began, with the same focus on Telemachus. So remember that from Nestor, Telemachus learned not to stay away from his home too long. He learned to return to take responsibility for his own land. And so on page 143, when Menelaus asks Telemachus to stay for a couple of weeks, we read, this is line 665. So again, line 665, and I will flip over there with you. Oops, I must have written that down. Anyway, we read that Telemachus summons up his newfound tact, and is able to say, no, don't keep me away too long. Also notice that Menelaus wants to give Telemachus a particular gift. He wants to give him horses, and Telemachus now knows his land, and he says, not on rocky Ithaca. Give us something else. If you want to bestow a gift upon me, give me something that will be suitable to my home. And Menelaus recognizes Odysseus through his words. And I'll just ask you on your own to look at line 690 for that very point. Okay, so actually, I'll read it to you. So this is on page 143. He says, so Telemachus declared, and the Lord of the war cry smiled, patted him with his hand, and praised his guest, concluding, good blood runs in you, dear boy, your words are proof. So once more, Telemachus' words, his good sense, his tact, these are all indications that he is becoming a man in his father's own image, and so he is becoming his father's own son.